finally, consider the state. So, the state is, as we know, state, government, it's the most complex, the most powerful of institutions. Its many arms, the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, enter all the arenas that we're talking about. They affect the family, they affect the workplace, they affect the community. The state has the power to transform them or to undermine them. So for instance, if you take again gender as an example, the state could reform inheritance laws to make them gender equal. It could provide legal aid to women wanting to claim family property. It could transfer land to the poor and to poor women for farming and homesteads. It could create jobs. It could provide safety. Now, all these steps could increase the bargaining power of women and the poor in multiple arenas. Or the state can fail to do all of the above. So I'm sharing with you 2 lines from a poem by the older Bachchan, and he alerts us to this danger. उतरे इन आँखों के आगे जो हार चमेली ने पहने, वह छीन रहा देखो माली सुकुमार लताओं के गहने. Look, the gardener is himself destroying the garden. So I see these evocative lines as a caution that all those that we think as our protectors, our families, our neighbors, our employers, most of all the state, can become assailants unless we transform these institutions to regain our common humanity. Notably, the state is not a monolith. It too is an arena of cooperation and conflict between parties with varying degrees of commitment to equality and social justice. Now, in which direction the state moves can depend on many factors. But in my view, the following would be especially important. So let's say, here's the state. And you can see what it says, that democracy is also the freedom to elect dictators. So what do we need? One is strong opposition parties, which could provide checks and alternative visions and paths to development, something I think we are quite deficit of. We have a deficit of at present. An independent judiciary which can protect citizens' rights against an overarching state, and I believe we have a fairly independent judiciary, recent judgments included. Then, very difficult and independent non-corrupt bureaucracy which implements policy and can resist political pressure. So if we think of Mr. Borker's time, if we think of just after independence, the civil service was like that. I'm not sure that we've done all that well in recent decades. Then we have the media. Now, potentially, of course, the media can be a voice of people and the voice of conscience in interrogating the state. Some elements of the media can serve this function, but others today are not. So for instance, as we know, a typical discussion on TV has representatives from major political parties who drown out the voice of the one token non-party expert. So each channel, as we know, sounds more chaotic, more loud than our parliament. And like our parliament, there is a notable absence of women as serious economic and political commentators. So my question to the media is, do all sides have moral equivalence? It's a question which the American public is also asking today. If the media is to be a voice of the disadvantaged, shouldn't it be privileging their voices and the voices of non-partisan experts and civil society? Without the mandatory loud presence of political spokespersons on every panel. So if you're friends in the media, you could convey this. The fifth significant element is, of course, intra-party democracy, the freedom to be critical of one's own party and its agenda. Now, it's striking that in the US today, so many Republicans are speaking out against the statements of their own Republican president. Now, in India, towing the party line is considered a virtue. So transforming the state requires that, at least this is what I feel, is that the elected representatives have to have their own moral compass and stand by it when needed, beyond party diktat. But the most important external check is, of course, civil society, all of us here. What can we do? Well, for a start, we can hold our representatives accountable for the social policies they promised. We also need to know, what do they stand for? You know, there's a long-standing demand, as you know, for reservation of 1/3 seats of women in parliament, but will the women so elected speak up for women's rights? Now, Shirin Rai, a political scientist from Warwick University, where Upendra Baxi is also based, she interviewed many Indian women legislators, and she found that none saw herself as representing women's interests. Typically, they felt that they were bound by the party's agendas. So does this mean there's little point in electing women to power? Of course not. But we do need more than simply having a woman in office to further women's interests. And we can say the same for Dalit and minority candidates. What do people stand for? Most of all, I'm sure you would agree, we need a state committing to upholding our Constitution's 4 basic principles: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, these are all principles we cherish and they're worth fighting for. But there's a great chasm between believing in these principles and realizing them. And the state will not automatically help us do so. I believe we also have responsibility as citizens to help realize them. So the question is, can we build a national consensus such that the 4 constitutional principles become the touchstone of state performance, which no political party can elude? The power of movements, of protests, of insisting you can't do this, not in my name, all this matters in every decade, but perhaps more today than ever before. So I have argued that in my vision of India 2047, I would like to see a transformation of our 4 major institutions: the family, the workplace, the community, and the state. And we've talked of every institution separately. But each is deeply connected to the other. So if you have families in which care work is shared, it will increase work options for all members. You have a workplace which is flexible, it will create stronger families and communities. Communities which cooperate across difference and reach out to those in need will prosper, and a state which upholds its constitutional guarantees will strengthen all other institutions and the country. In fact, only then should they be worthy of our vote. So let me end on a personal note. So when I think back over the past few decades, I feel that among the most vibrant periods, barring short reversals, were the 1980s and early 1990s. And that was when social movements found strength. The women's movement, the environment movement, movements for civil liberties and democratic rights. The voice of civil society could be heard loud and clear and could be raised without fear. Also, as a woman, you could ride home after midnight without being stalked. As a free-thinking person, you could speak out without being trolled. So we were economically poor as a nation, but we felt a sense of hope. So to transform 2047, I believe we need a resurgence of that vibrancy and that hope. And again, I found 2 lines from Bachchan's another poem. लहरों से डरकर नैया पार नहीं होती, कोशिश करने वालों की हार नहीं होती. So to conclude, a friend of mine suggested, she's sitting here, that I should end my talk with an inspiring image. So I chose an unusual one, and I chose the image of my favorite galaxy, which is Andromeda. Now this galaxy is 2.5 million light years away. Just imagine when the light that we observed on Earth from Andromeda left the galaxy, there were no humans on Earth. By the time the light reached us, you could see it, we had a flourishing civilization. Thank you.
Well, on that wonderful note at the end, I think you'll all agree with me that we've had a very inspiring lecture. And we have looked at questions of gender inequality through the 4 institutions of family, the workplace, the community, and the state. And in the course of this, we've had a very privileged overview of the range of Binaji's writing and her concerns. We've had a taste of her theoretical sophistication, her methodological rigor, and her insistence on empirical emphasis and demonstration, all neatly wrapped and visually attractive. I also applaud her surprise ending to many of these sections, her evolving interest in the question of care and the care economy in both its gender and its citizenship aspects. The underlying theoretical proposition through this has been very much the bargaining model as she spelt it out, and the coexistence of the co-presence of the alternatives of cooperation and conflict or competition through the 4 institutional contexts that she dealt with. And gender was the main theme here. I was left thinking about how much more one could generalize this, the simultaneity or the alternative possibilities of cooperation and conflict. Recently, we noted that the Honorary Planning Commission was disbanded or abolished and replaced by the Niti Aayog. And along with this came a doctrine which still, which I still don't know what it's meant to be about. I've still not seen it properly explained, but it was called competitive cooperative federalism. And I think that's a problem in India today and the India tomorrow that we have to really think about in a creative way. And beyond this, I think that, one of the great readings in anthropology, which is my basic discipline, is Bronislaw Malinowski's Argonauts of the Western Pacific. And here he described in amazing detail how one of the world's, at that stage, very primitive people organized a collective cooperation in a trading network called the Kula Ring, where people both competed and cooperated, each to give the other the material resources that they needed. This brings us to the state of the world today, where in our neighborhood and in the global political economy, we see a great deal of competition. We see a great deal of competition and a deficit of cooperation, and entering a world which, whatever we do in India, is a dangerous place to live in. So beyond the gender question, I think she has raised issues which will affect us in India and in the world for a very long time to come, and which are real and in front of our eyes right here and now. Now, the icing on this cake, beyond a very brilliant lecture, is the remarks of our chairperson, Professor Upendra Baxi. So we hand over to him to conclude the proceedings with his own thoughts. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Very good evening to you, and I'll be as painless as humanly possible because the time is too far up to make any serious remarks. But I hope I'll end up shortly not making too flippant remarks. First of all, I congratulate the Borker family, particularly Suhas, Sudha, Ham and Girja, and all the wider family. I speak under the shadow of my old friend Bina Agarwal, who has preferred to end by going beyond the terra firma, and Professor Patricia Uberoi, and all the gentle persons who have stayed so long and so far with us. I say gentle persons because I'm basically, I pose myself as a feminist, and I don't divide humankind into men and women. So ladies and gentlemen is an anti-feminist expression. I think one thing that we did not do, and I cannot do, is to introduce one person who shares the podium with us, that is Patricia Uberoi. And I cannot do it in detail, but in broad strokes, I suppose she needs no introduction. But the Indian tradition is to always say that the speaker needs no introduction, and then take away all the speaker's time. I won't do that. I would simply say that Indian feminism or feminist movement in India would be inconceivable without her and her labors. She's worked as an outstanding scholar on women's issues, but other issues, social issues, both at the Institute of Economic Growth and in Jawaharlal Nehru University. She's been a catalyst and has transformed the Center for Women's Studies and also the widely known publication called Contributions to Indian Sociology, and your person's services to the journal are difficult to put in few words at this occasion. So, she had the pleasure of introducing us, and I had the reciprocal pleasure of introducing and welcoming her, though at the end of the day. As to Bina, we have heard a most scintillating address. Memorial lectures are easy to inaugurate, but difficult to sustain. And I noticed Soli when I came in, but it's all late, she must have left. But Soli has done a remarkable job of sustaining Ross Memorial Lectures every year. And the second series I can think of is the Borker Memorial Lecture. So my congratulations for keeping it up and going so far as the next century in prognostication. I think Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee, the dawn of Indian sociologists, if he was with us today, he would have been very glad, because while he recognized that prognostication or peep into future is a very hazardous enterprise indeed, he gave prediction a place of pride in unified social sciences. And he would have been very happy with what Professor Agarwal has said today in terms of looking to India of the future. I will not take more of your time except to say 3 or 4 quick points which occurred to me as she addressed us. The first, and these are points or pointers towards further thinking, not in any sense a comment on what she has said. The first thing that struck me was this idea of transformation. I think the idea of transformation is very important. But surely we have to ask ourselves one question, and it is this: who leads the process of transformation and who is led by process of transformation? In other words, who is it? Is it a binary or a continuum? And then a lot depends on how we receive Bina Agarwal on this subject. The founders of modern social theory, and that's my second general remark, Durkheim, Weber, and Uncle Marx among them, gave, as you know, a great deal of importance to law as a property of social structure. With the rise of positivism after Talcott Parsons and a bit of Merton, law has virtually disappeared from the view. But they thought three agencies were central to social control and social change. And these were religion, education, and law. Law has disappeared, except in India we think, and we meet on the eve of the privacy decision and triple talaq decisions. The great thing about that is that the privacy decision is a unanimous decision, which doesn't happen very often in the Supreme Court. It's a nice gift to the people of India, and a nice gift also to Chief Justice K.R., who is retiring very soon. So I think law plays its part, but we seem to put, and Bina Agarwal was right to correct us in this perspective, we seem to put too many things at the doorstep of the law as an instrumentality of social change. And we leave behind religion and education. And I believe that is a very important aspect that we must consider. The third point I wish to make very quickly is Bina rightly emphasized the role of civic movement. But, and she rightly emphasized the state and law as partners in social movement. The question does arise, however, on how we conceive of civil society. Civil society is an arm of the state, or civil society is a space we colonize and colonized by governance, as happened in the case recently. There are different views on the subject, of course, by demonetization and by the battle over Aadhaar, that the creeping statification of civil society versus civil society as a domain of resistance and movement. Which do we pick? And I think Mr. Borker had lots to say on that, and Bina has lots said today that needs deep thinking. And in return, therefore, for transformation, the transforming institution, should we give a proud place to state and the judiciary, or should we give a place of pride to social movements? And what in social movements? Not all social movements are necessarily social. Some are social and some are not. And we have to tread very carefully when we extol social movement. Very often social movements are a mere reflection of the way state is constructed. And very often they are state transcendent. And we have to make our sums as we go along. And finally, Bina pointed out rightly, and I think that is, I'm putting it in a different way, namely, there has been recurrence of partition in India as a way of governance, of stratification, or settlatory, whichever is your favorite word. In fact, a political scientist named Paul Brass wrote a book a long time ago on the state of Uttar Pradesh. It's called The Theft of Idol and Other Essays. And in that, Paul Brass says, the state of Uttar Pradesh can only be described then as, I quote him, as an institutionalized riot system. Should state be an institutionalized riot system, or should state be a constitutional state, as Bina pointed out, serving basic core human rights and common values, core values? Should the state do its bravest and the best and the brightest in preventing preparation for genocide and commission of genocide, whether against women, whether against other people, any persons? Or should the state connive at violations of human rights? And finally, there is the eternal question which Bina Agarwal has ended with going intergalactic. Maybe when you look at non-colonizable outer space to the planet Earth, maybe when you take a galactic point of view, does it really matter what the future of human species is or remains? And there are some challenging thoughts that Bina has presented, and I'm very glad that I myself decided to hear her in person. We go back a long way, Bina, and she was the first person in my life, if I may be slightly personal, to come to us in the Indian Law Institute and to say that article I wrote on state, Sattama and Siksha, the BD workers in Andhra Pradesh, and state, Sattama and Siksha, was not easily publishable, and she wrote an number of editorial queries. I was then working against the state of, with the Bhopal violated. I'm still working, it's about 34th year. And they are still where they are after the catastrophe. So I could oblige the editors, but ultimately I published an essay in a book with some benefit of hindsight, the suggestions that they gave, in a book called Law and Poverty and other essays. So when she looks at the future, or the present, or the past, she looks with tough eyes and intransigent vision. And these are very outstanding and eminent qualities that we all ought to imbibe. Thank you again.